Hello everyone and welcome to the Edge webinar. Today it's Mary Maguire here from the Female Edge. I'm joined by Elaine Seale-McKend, who's an amazing and very experienced coach, facilitator, team dynamics expert, and she has a whole range of things that she shares her knowledge on. But today I thought it'd be really great to bring her into a conversation to talk about how to network in a way that takes all of the angst around it. And I don't know if you're like me, but I remember in my early career, this was one of the ones that I really struggled with and, felt quite challenged by. I also see it as one of the things that I think that there is a bit of a gender difference here now. I think that men and women both can find networking a bit overwhelming at times, but I see women really struggling with this a lot. So I thought that would be good to have that conversation. So as always, the Edge webinar series is getting the intersectionality around work, around women, around career, around organisation. So I'm delighted, as I said, to be joined by Elaine. So let's start, Elaine, by hearing a bit about you, your background, where you come from and what you do.
Okay, thanks, Mary. It's really lovely to be here, and I'm delighted to be able to talk about this because networking and connection, as you said, is often such a challenge for so many people, and I often see that coming up with my coachees and the leaders that I work with, and personally, my friends as well. So my background is really largely people-based. I've always had that kind of contact. Sorry.
We're live, folks. That's actually showing you we're live.
Apologies. I've turned it off twice. Mary. So I'm going to bury it now.
We want people to know we're live.
I'll bury it now. Yeah, very broad-based, always with the theme of people, though. So HR, people management, into search and recruitment, where building a network was absolutely critical. It was one of the key things we were tasked at doing. And I always felt a little bit uncomfortable around that. And so that's where I kind of draw some of this experience from. And then really my own business. And again, building contacts, building connections is such an important part of the work that I do. But I suppose also for me personally, I've always thought that it's something that I love to be connected. So I'm interested in this as a theme as well. So yeah, really excited to be sharing that today.
Yeah, and brilliant, absolutely. And I just want to say, tell us a little bit about the work that you do as well.
Sure. So I work with a number of different leaders. A lot of those are women leaders. And for them, we've also developed some kind of things around women at work and some of the reasons why women find it so challenging to reach senior leadership positions. So I do a lot of one-on-one and team and group coaching, and then some leadership development on the side of that. I also, a big fitness, I'm into health and wellness. I really feel that's an important element of us all. And that helps with a lot of other things that are not directly or, not necessarily seen as being directly related. And I was doing this years ago before wellness became such a big theme. So I love talking about that in a holistic way. And I'm a big cyclist and I take time to do that as well. I really feel that's important in terms of being the best that I can be. And I'm sure Mary, being self-employed, it's really important that you keep your energy levels high and feel engaged and able to kind of really give some energy to what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had to think that when I was dragging myself out of bed this morning to do my Pilates classes, like, and I do this, and I thought, I'll feel better afterwards.
Absolutely.
So we've already hit on the issue around networking and making connections being quite a challenge for us. And I'd preface this by saying, I think all of us at certain times in our career find this a challenge. But as I said, I think women particularly find this a challenge. So tell us a bit about why is it such an area that we struggle with?
Yeah, and I think the thing is also it's often one of the key things that are expected of you in a work context, particularly as you get more senior, but we know also it's very critical for career development. And I believe that part of this, from what I hear people saying, is it just feels so uncomfortable. Networking, the whole word networking, almost makes you think, oh my goodness, I can think of nothing worse than going to a networking event, because it doesn't feel very deep. it feels very surface. And I think that there's a kind of almost a turn off for women in not feeling that they want to develop deeper relationships. So going to an event where they're just going to kind of almost be a very, very thin slice of who they are doesn't necessarily feel that authentic to them. And I think that so maybe a way of making this more palatable and easy for us to engage with is to call it something else, and then perhaps frame it in a different way, so that women are able to feel that they want to be more engaged with it. And often, other responsibilities that we know women take major responsibility for childcare, and lots of other things in the home. Often those networking events are held at times when they can't necessarily make them. And men are more able to engage because it's after work, maybe going to the pub, which is a kind of unofficial networking, but other events that are scheduled, it's easier for them, and therefore they build much more kind of deeper relationships earlier on in their career, which and women are not often prohibited from doing that for various different reasons.
I think I just wanted to bring in, and you're probably familiar with this, there's an annual report called Women in the Workplace, which is done by McKinsey and Lean In. Now, it's mainly a US perspective, but an awful lot of these issues and these themes are coming in. And that one that you've hit on about networking and the gender difference about it's easier for men, not only from they generally have the behaviours which are more around going out and selling yourself and saying who you are, but also the ways that networking is done after work in a pub, maybe at a golf club or something like that. It's more suited to a male role model than it is for female. I mean, we are definitely seeing that in career outcomes as well.
Yeah. And just a quick story on that. I've seen real examples of where women have tried to get involved into the golf day or whatever, and have been given a more clerical type responsibility at that. So they haven't even been placed where the action is happening. And in terms of client development, particularly in banking, where it's critical to build those relationships, it's difficult for women sometimes to actually get in there in the first place.
Was it you were there telling me the story about a senior executive female, and there was going to be an event, and it was very important clients she had to get in front of, and it was a golf day. She didn't play golf. Was this your story?
It was.
It was. And so she says, well, I'll caddy. I'm going to be on that course with you. I don't play golf. I'm not going to try and play it, but I'm going to be a caddy for the day. And it's like, I'm not suggesting that women should have to do that, but I think that level of intention about I'm not going to let this get in the way of me getting in front of these clients was brilliant response.
I think that's the key point, Mary, and I love that. It's a key takeaway. Definitely. There's
a few themes you ask us to consider when we're thinking about network as well, so you tell us about some of them, and then I'll share some of your ideas.
I will, actually. So I think, this problem with networking in terms of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, both are good. We know that. Both have got, huge value to the workplace and personally as well. The difficulty with those that are more introverted is the thought of going to a networking is like almost like they'd rather go to the dentist than go to a networking event. Whereas extroverts are perhaps more, they would actually like getting out there. They get energy from it. And so there's a bit of a split there, and it's harder for those with introversions to actually push themselves into that, particularly when it's difficult. There are lots of excuses that we can make not to go. And that gets in the way of our longer term ability to network or make connections effectively. I do think confidence and self-esteem is a big thing. I think this whole imposter syndrome, and I do feel that that's one of the key things we need to be able to do, particularly as women and as men, is to build our confidence, know what we do really well, know our value to other people, both in the workplace and from a kind of personal perspective, in order to build that up. If you're starting with a place you feel comfortable and secure, you've got the knowledge, it's much easier then to ask the right questions and for your opinion to be valued. I think this whole thing around it feeling dirty and distasteful, I've had those words used, so I think finding a different way of phrasing networking, finding a better connecting. I much prefer that word, connecting. Actually, interestingly enough, Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, just put a podcast up. Well, it was actually it was a video, and he talks about the importance of friendship. He doesn't talk about tech. He doesn't talk about entrepreneurship. He doesn't talk about some of those other good things, but what he does focus in is how it is important to build friendships, to make a meaningful and productive life. That importance of happiness and connecting in a really genuine and authentic way really is important to us. So thinking about, where are those opportunities to engage? Have I thought really broadly about this? Am I just trying to keep in a small network? Have I thought about where the other opportunities are? And to be really clear that the reasons that this is so important is so multiple, not just from a career perspective, really important from a career perspective, but from a personal and perhaps, I run my own business. And Mary, I'm sure you and I have both known situations where people least expected to turn up, pop up. And the fact that we've been able to keep a connection with them over those years puts us in a position to be able to directly engage with them. And I do think that it really is important not to wait until you need something to connect with people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, build them relationships over time. I just want to pull out a few things there because there's so much. I mean, we could spend the whole time on this, but I know there's a few other nuggets of gold you want to share with us as well. But one of them is the introversion and extroversion one. I think people, when we talk about, and you're probably the same as me, introversion and extroversion, we're talking about it from an energy standpoint. So extroversion people are people who get their energy from speaking to other people and building the ideas through conversation. Introversion is very much internal and getting real clarity for themselves before they share. So it's not so much social skills as more how they interact with the world. So I think people think if I'm introverted, I can't connect well, I can't network well. And actually that's not true. I think it's more, as you've said in the bottom, what's the mindset you go in with? What's the way I view this? And I think that reframing it from networking to I'm going to a connection event, or I'm going to an engagement event, or I'm going to have some interesting conversations. So almost taking networking out of it in your mind lowers the level of concern about what I'm expected to do or what I'm expected to see. So I really liked some of them things that you've shared.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think the thing is also for introverts, often it's more around if they can understand the purpose that they're doing it, it has more resonance for them rather than just going and gaining energy from a group of people. So I think that's really important. So lovely. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, unless was these three types of networks. So we can think about who we've got to connect to, what it is we want from them, what it is we've got to give to them. But you've put it into these three networks. And sorry, people, about the graphic. It's been a bit resized in our streaming platform here. But talk us through this a bit.
Sure. So there's been a lot of interest, particularly recently, and this goes back over time. But I suppose one of the other things that's important to think about, Mary, at the moment is this kind of shift to hybrid working and the kind of outcome that's produced, and the being much more deliberate. So organizations now are really trying to re-engage their people to get them back into the office because they see the value of that. There's a reason why Google, for example, have now said 3 days a week their employees need to be back at work, because they see the collaboration opportunities that exist when that happens, when people spark things off one another. So if we're thinking perhaps we don't have that opportunity for those water cooler moments, being more deliberate and understanding that there are three different types of network. There are those operational ones, which are really the kind of short-term demands, meeting objectives, task-based areas of network. And then there are the strategic, which is more around leveraging that kind of inside-outside link, but it's looking to the future. So thinking about the purpose and what the future priorities are and who the stakeholders are. So that's a kind of at a strategic level. And then the personal is really to do with enhancing your own personal development and professional development. So, things like, and really interestingly, I came to Dublin from another country, and building networks is tough, but I'm a cyclist. I belong to a cycling club, and there's a common interest there, which allows us to talk about things. And funnily enough, a lot of those people also, of course, have jobs and they see opportunities, and I've been able to build out from that. So it's really around thinking much more broadly around what networks can I tap into that make me feel that I have a common purpose to be there. And that's really important. Alumni, things with personal interest where we've got something in common. So that's really how I would kind of segregate it. And considering and working in all of those spaces is really important. I might prefer to be down in that personal box, but actually the importance of making sure that I don't neglect those other two areas is really critical.
Yeah. And if I look at how I might interpret them based on what you've said, is the personal one is the go-to people I might go to maybe get more advice about me as a person. So people like friends and long-term colleagues who've now become friends, or loved ones who would be part of conversations which may have to do with work, but also to do with me, with them, with what's going on. But it's more about who I am as a person. And where it's operational, it's more about the work I do. So the role and the tasks and the objectives and the goals and the projects I'm delivering, and how I actually use my network to make sure I'm working with the stakeholders who are in my immediate circle of influence, but also thinking of that in terms of other people who might need to be oiling the wheels or be aware of what's coming on as well. So that's more of a tactical approach, but really important. And then the third one, the strategic one, is more about thinking of what I'm doing now in the context of my broader career, and where are the people who maybe can help me in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, who I don't really have a relationship with now, but I'd like to build one so that we can see where this goes and how we can develop things in the future.
Absolutely. That's a really good summary. And I do think it's around, building a list and going broad. So, those leaders that do it really well are those that have really done some stakeholder mapping, and they understand these three different types of networks and kind of give attention to all three of them.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say to you, is what you'd be suggesting to people is thinking about, building up your network in these three areas together, because if you don't have them in some areas, then you may find you're struggling. So having people who got your back on a personal level really helps with confidence, making sure you got the right stakeholders around you when you're doing your job and you've got big things to deliver, also important. And then also thinking about, well, this role suits me now, it might not suit me in the long term. So who do I need to start thinking about having conversations with now for something in the future?
Yeah, exactly. So really try and look for the gaps and address them.
Yeah, that sounds that sounds really good. And what are the things that people need to be, because you've mentioned a few things in the previous slide about getting into the right mindset, thinking about your value. What are some of the things that people need to think about? So maybe they've got a big event coming up, which is a work leadership seminar, or maybe it's to do with their professional body and there's some annual conference that they're going to go to. What are some of the things they can do to get themselves into the right frame of mind and the right place, and make the best use of these opportunities?
I think firstly, it's kind of perhaps doing some research. If you know the name, look up that person, have an understanding of what they do, what interests them. There's so much you can get. We're so lucky now. I mean, we've got so much technology at our fingertips. You type in somebody's name and they usually come up on LinkedIn. You can see what work they've done, if they publish papers, all of that. It all helps to kind of grow an understanding of, as I say, what interests them, and to really be able to engage in a meaningful way with them. So I think that's really key. There's this whole thing around, I was thinking of a quick model, and I know I've given you one, Mary, the GATS one, but there's another one. We love models. I've called it goals, actually. And I think the first thing is, we have to give to get back. So it's not about thinking, I need somebody to do something for me. It's really going in with a mindset of how can I support this person? What matters to them? And I think you gain some of that through doing some research prior to an event that you were going to. And then it's really being able to kind of open up the conversation. That's the O in goals. And then the third, the A, is anticipatory listening. So really, really hone into the conversation. Don't be fiddling on your phone while you're trying to have a conversation. Give somebody that full eye contact so that they feel that you're really listening to them effectively. And I think all of that, we thinking about building long-term relationships. So that's the L in that. And I suppose the last one is the S, which is kind of how do you sustain and nurture? And how that is something that is ongoing, is really making sure that you reach out and keep in touch with those people in a meaningful way.
Yeah. And what about in LinkedIn? I mean, LinkedIn, you've mentioned already, is one of the big platforms now that we use for networking. So if you've met somebody in an event and then you make a connection with them on LinkedIn, what are some of the things that people can do to continue to generate that connection via that platform?
Yeah. So the first thing I would never do is send that automated, oh, hello, I've noticed, the kind of thing that comes up. I always personalize it. And I usually find either something that I know that person's interested in to directly reference it. To show that I've actually making a bit of effort actually to really understand a little bit about what they're about. So I would always do a research piece. I'd look at their profile. I'd see if there's anybody I knew in common. If there are any organizations that appeal to me in common. Are they on a board? Do they belong to a special interest group? So I'd really connect using that with a personalized statement. And I'd just usually say, I'd love to connect with you. I try and make it as loose as I can without putting too much pressure on. And I would never go and directly ask for, I'm looking for a job, or I would always go in with a kind of warm up first, because you don't want to be rejected. You want to really, for that person to accept you as a contact. And my network is all people that I know, or they know somebody I know. So that's also the fabulous thing about LinkedIn, is this ability to see who else you know, who else they know, what are the common connections that you've got. So you can name them. I see that we both know Mary. Mary and I have worked together. Love to share some thoughts, something like that.
Yeah, I really like that. So personalize the invite rather than just send, I'd like to be in your connection. Go out of your way to find something about the person that you can acknowledge in the approach to them, and then find a way of finding a common connection that you can use to start building the relationship, rather than what you want from them. So it's more about what we can get from each other. I think they're great tips. I just want to acknowledge Jill's also made a comment there about it. Totally agree about you get back what you give. So that thing about reciprocity, I really struggle with that word. But about getting the balance between the give and the take of your goals, really important. So I think it's when people start a networking event with, oh, I'm looking for a job, can you help me with a job? It's a little bit like going on a first date and saying, oh, are you ready to get married now? It's like, we just don't do that in real life. And it's the same thing, isn't it? We've got to build up the relationship and understand where our common ground is before we start asking for things from somebody.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something really important there, Mary, which is the building of trust. And that's critical for any relationship, and work relationships are as important, if not more so. We know how important trust is in terms of productivity and relationships with others. I also heard a couple of really lovely phrases today, and I think one of them is be where your feet are. So when you're actually, particularly in a face-to-face networking situation, be totally there in the moment, really listening. I love that. And also this whole concept of heads up versus heads down. We know when we're in the office, those people you've got continuously got your head down, you're missing what's going on in the wider world. So really kind of trying to kind of pay attention to that.
And on, we've got to work a bit harder on things like these online platforms as well to build that rapport. So we have to be a little bit more extrovert in our body language and in our facial expressions and things to actually build that rapport, because it's not as natural in these environments, is it?
No.
So we really have to think about projecting things. So there was a few things that you had as suggestions. I'm just going to bring that. Yeah, the suggestions about when you are in a networking event, you've made a connection, you feel that there's some common ground. What you do about that? So talk us through this.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in really understanding your strengths, and I really do take a strengths approach. It's a positive kind of approach to things, but it does require some reflection and really to kind of think, usually 3 to 5 things that you do really well. So understand your superpowers and your capabilities, and that can be something really quite simple. I feel like, I suppose it's taken me a while to get to this, but connecting, I love connecting people. I really do. I'm passionate about it. So when I meet somebody and they're talking, I'm immediately thinking, I wonder who I could connect them with that would be meaningful for both of them. And it's often, understanding that about yourself. Knowing your own goals and values. I mean, really, where do you want to get to? And I suppose making sure those are with that kind of give to get back hat on. But that key thing is the way that we feel valued as human beings. If somebody's really listening to us, that they're asking questions that relate to what we're saying, and that build on what we've said, and to help, to really understand where are the pain points, what are the challenges this person's got. And we've got something really that we all have been through, which gives us a common thing, which is not necessarily to dwell on too much, but we've all been through a pandemic. We've all felt that. So there's something there that's kind of united us in some way, that we've all been through the similar experience. Some are obviously worse than others. So connecting with those pain points, and I've had that actually in a room recently where somebody really was feeling vulnerable after coming back into the workplace after the pandemic, and being able to just talk to them about that. And think, understand what their hopes and dreams are. What are their challenges? What do they want to get? And how could you support them in a meaningful way? And then really this importance of making sure that you follow through. Don't promise something and then don't follow up. That's the worst thing that you can do in terms of building relationships. And just continuing to build that trust through developing and delivering on what you say you're going to do.
I think that really, really simple, the gather, ask, do, really simple. But I think even that there's a strategy in that about you're going to a networking event, you're thinking through, the people you might meet, you're doing some research ahead of time, which is what you mentioned. And then you're actually thinking about how am I going to be in this? And actually, that's a very simple model thing. Well, I'm going to really go and listen, be where my feet are. Love that. Jill said she loved that as well. They're really good comment. Gather, really, really listen to people, really build on and ask meaningful questions, which are very pertinent to the conversation you're having, and then the follow-up afterwards. I think that's the bit where people really do let themselves down. They go to an event, have great conversations, sometimes quite excited and energized by it, and then they're back at work, and the next day everything's busy, it's all gone a blank again, and so they don't reap the value of what they've done because they're not following up. So I think that the follow-up's really important. The other thing I often say to people is, if you follow up with somebody with an email and you don't hear from them, don't assume that they've rejected you or they're ignoring you. Assume that they've got a very busy inbox and they're having lots of emails all at the same time and they just didn't get to yours. So email them again. Not every day, but maybe in a couple of weeks' time, saying, I sent you an email. I'm sure you're really busy, but I really enjoyed our conversation and I'd love to follow it up. So don't stop at the first hurdle. Allow a bit of time and then build and go back to them, because I think that again, it's not only women, but women, because they're not as confident in networking, tend to send that email, they don't hear from them and think, maybe we're not meant to have this conversation. It's like, no, go back again. Try again, without becoming a stalker, and I would say 2 further follow-ups, and then if you don't hear anything, and that would be within that first month, then it's not a connection that's going to grow. But often you're working with people, and I've done it myself. I've missed emails, and then somebody's come back to me and said, thanks heavens you've come back to me. I did see it. It was a nanosecond and everything else crowded in. Thanks for coming back to me. So we all of us are human, and we need to think in that context, don't we?
Yeah, no, I agree, Mary. And so don't take immediate rejection.
Yeah.
You're right, because it's particularly if you're kind of feeling a bit insecure and underconfident, it can be a real knock. But
Yeah.
I would agree with you. Encourage, keep going, and as you say,
Yeah.
try that kind of power of three.
Yeah.
Try 3 times, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And if that's not the connection, put it down to experience, you know, the huge amount of skills that you've built. And then you can think about going into the next event with the GAD model again of gather, ask, do, and then find out from there. Because I'm a great believer, and I'm sure you are, that the right people come to us at the right time for the right reason. And if we come from that belief, it's like, if this is meant to be a connection, that we're building something together over time, it will become that connection. And if it doesn't, they're not the right person.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's one kind of final thing I'd say is that it is a muscle. You know, we have to use it and build it. It doesn't necessarily come naturally to all of us, but it does get easier the more you do it and the more you practice. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. So if there was one thing that, you know, you would suggest that people listening to this could do as a takeaway, you know, one particular action to help them with this, what would you suggest they do?
I think for everybody that's listening, I think that having that kind of really pushing themselves into that space to engage. I think particularly after, you know, the pandemic, where people have been shut at home and it actually feels quite alien. Somebody said it's a bit like riding a bike. You know, it's easier for some of us to get back on that bike and start riding it than for others. But I would suggest that everybody needs to get on that bike and to not be put off doing it. So don't put it off. Take the opportunities that come and try and seek them as well. And if you can follow a simple model like that, I like Gather, because Gather feels a lot nicer word than networking. So it's about kind of gathering what we can in terms of connections. Use an approach like that would work for you, but don't put it off. And I suppose be brave.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can use them 3 networks, the personal, operational and strategic, and maybe get 2 or 3 names off each of them, and then send them an email saying, you know, can we meet up or have a virtual coffee or whatever it could be, but just start the conversations with them and say, you know, it's been a while, or I've always wanted to speak to you, or whatever the conversation needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Lovely conversation, Elaine, and so practical, because, you know, as we said at the beginning, networking, connecting, engaging, wherever we want to frame it as, is critical to our long-term success. It oils the wheels of our career, both in the now and in the future. And the better we get at that muscle, the more that we reap the rewards of it as well. So a really, really important conversation. So I really appreciate you coming on and speaking about it. Really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, Mary. And I agree, it's really imperative. So fabulous that you were able to host this today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And for everyone listening, I hope you found that useful. Always love your comments. So even if you're listening to this as a playback, if you've got any comments, put them in the comment section and we come back to you and we'll answer them again. And thank you for the comments that we've had while we've been on. We'd love to keep the conversation going. So if you wanted to connect with Elaine, you can find her on her email, which is Elaine Seale-McKend @gmail.com. Her website is fitconsultancy.co.uk, and obviously on LinkedIn, which if you're looking for the LinkedIn platform, you'll be able to connect with her directly from that. And obviously, you know me, Mary Agents to Change, and my LinkedIn profile you'll be able to find on here as well. So I hope you find it useful. Do share any comments or reflections, and we're wishing you the very best of days. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.